Hello children, we will start the next chapter, cell structure and function. You may also name this chapter as the fundamental unit of life, that is cell. You must have seen millions of things around you. Some of them are considered as living and some of them are non-living. The brick walls, the paper, those are considered as non-living. The soil, the water, they are non-living content around you. And the other content like the other animals, mosquitoes, the insects, they are living content. The plants are living content around our surroundings. Living things basically perform certain activities, certain processes to maintain their life, and those processes are referred as maintenance processes or life processes. These processes are movement, respiration, sensitivity, growth, reproduction, excretion, nutrition, transportation. These are the basic life processes which a living organism possess to maintain its life. In your higher classes you will entirely study those processes one by one named under a chapter, that is life processes. So these are the basic maintenance processes by which a living organism maintain its life on the earth, on the planet earth. Whereas non-living things do not possess all these basic processes. Non-living things can move by the external force. As a car can move but by the help of an external force. For that we have to burn a certain fuel, and only then that car moves. We can kick a stone and then by that kick the stone will start to move. They will show movement, but that movement is due to external force. Whereas movement in living organism is due to their internal force. So this is the basic feature on which we will differentiate a living from non-living thing. Next thing, bache, a very important one. Living organisms possess a cellular structure. What do you mean by this? That is, they are made up of cells. They possess a cellular structure. Whereas non-living things do not possess any cellular structure. They are not made up of cells, bache. So that is the basic difference between a living and non-living thing. Next thing, bache, how that cell discovered, what is the discovery and history of the cell. The first cell was discovered by Robert Hooke in 1665, about which he writes in his book named as Micrographia. He wrote a book, bache, that is Micrographia. In that book he wrote about this cell. What he do is, he first of all prepare a crude microscope. Crude means a rough microscope banaya. How? That microscope was made by the combination of magnifying lenses. So these magnifying lenses will lead to the invention of microscopic world. अगर कोई पूछे बेटा which invention will lead to the discovery of microscopic world, the answer would be magnifying lenses. What Robert Hooke was did was, he joined those magnifying lenses in such a pattern, such a manner that they magnify the image form. And he observed a cork. From where he observed, take that cork. He take that cork from the bark of a tree. Then observed that cork under his self-designed crude microscope and observed a honeycomb-like structure. एक मधुमक्खी के छत्ते के जैसा स्ट्रक्चर दिखा है इसे. A honeycomb-like structure. इसमें क्या लिख रहा है? These little compartments, little rooms were visible to him. And he named those little compartments on the name of a Latin word, that is cellula. And on the basis of that name cellula, he gave that room, that component, a name, that is cell. So from which word he derived cell term? Cellular. That means little rooms. Actually, Robert Hooke discovered the cork, and cork is dead cells. Cork is made up of dead cells. These are just the cell walls बेटा. ये जो उसने ऑब्जर्व किया ये सिर्फ सेल वॉल्स थी. The living content of that cell was actually dead, was destroyed, degenerated. So he actually observed a dead cell. Then who discovered the first living cell? First living cell was discovered by Anton von Leeuwenhoek. He was also the first scientist who develops a compound microscope, or you can say who developed a light microscope. So if someone asked you who invented the microscope, Anton von Leeuwenhoek in 1674. He was the scientist who discovered the first living cell. How? He observed the pond water under his microscope, and he first discovered the cell, the living cell, that is bacteria. Along with that, Anton von Leeuwenhoek also discovered the many other kind of cells, like the sperm of humans, sperm of fishes, sperm of dogs and horses. Those cells are also discovered by Anton von Leeuwenhoek. So that's how the first microscope and the first cell was discovered. Next topic which we have to discuss is cell theory. There was two German scientists, biologists, who proposed the cell theory. What is cell theory? First scientist was Ch-8. In 1938, Ch-8 proposed that all the plants are made up of cells. According to Ch-8, the plants are made up of cells. Then, in 1839, that 1 year later, another scientist named as Schwann, its pronunciation is Schwann. Schwann proposed that not only the plants, all the plants and animals are made up of cells. So both of them then unite together and propose the cell theory. If someone asks you what is cell theory in 1 mark, the answer would be every living organism is made up of cells. हर एक living organism किससे मिलकर बना है बच्चे? Cell से. That is cell theory. इसे cell theory बोलते हैं. That theory was proposed by Ch-8 and Schwann. Then a scientist named as Rudolf Robert Virchow, he refined that theory, and he gave an epithet, that is omnis cellula e cellulae. It's just like मुहावरों जैसा है. What does that means? Omnis cellula e cellula का meaning क्या है? It means that every new cell arises from pre-existing cell. What do you mean by pre-existing? Pre मतलब पहले से, exist मतलब जो पाई जाती, which is already existed. So every new cell arises from pre-existing cell, and then that postulate is also added into the cell theory. Then later on, as science develops, the cell theory has multiple features in it. The postulates, the characteristics, विशेषताएं हैं कुछ उस cell theory की. What are the postulates or the characteristics of cell theory? It's a very, very important question. The first one, the basic point of the cell theory, that every living organism is made up of cells and cell products, और cell secretions भी लिख सकते हैं आप यहाँ. क्या मीनिंग है इस बात का बच्चे? कि हर एक लिविंग ऑर्गेनिज्म, whether it's a unicellular or multicellular, हम पढ़ेंगे, we'll study that one by one. Every living organism is made up of cells and cell secretions or cell products. Second thing बच्चे, cells are the basic structural and functional unit of life. Why it is referred as structural unit? Because it defines the structure बच्चे. In unicellular, only single cell is itself a complete organism. That is why they are referred as unicellular. Uni means single, cellular means made up of cells. One cell means one cell is doing everything. One cell is a complete structure in itself. एक cell अपने आप में पूरी structure है. And in multicellular, cells join together to form tissues. What happens in multicellular, beta? Cells join together to form tissues. Tissues then join together to form organs. Organs join together to form organ systems. And various organ systems combine together to form a complete organism. That's how a multicellular complex organism is formed, beta. So, this is the structural composition, that is the complex structural organization in a multicellular organism. हमने ऐसा ही है, सेल्स जुड़ी टिश्यू बना, टिश्यूज के जुड़ने से ऑर्गन्स बने, ऑर्गन्स के जुड़ने से ऑर्गन सिस्टम्स बने, और ऑर्गन सिस्टम्स के जुड़ने से कंप्लीट ह्यूमन बीइंग, एक कंप्लीट ऑर्गेनिज्म फॉर्म हो गया इन मल्टीसेल्युलर कॉम्प्लेक्स ऑर्गेनिजम्स. So that is why cell is the basic structural unit of life. Next, why it is referred as functional unit? Because cell perform all the basic functions of life. Now question arises, what are the basic functions of life? The basic life processes, beta. Movement, respiration, sensitivity, growth, reproduction, excretion, nutrition, transportation. Those all the basic processes of life are performed by a single cell also. That is why cell is referred as basic structural and functional unit of life. That is the second postulate of cell theory. Second characteristic of cell theory. Third one is omnicellular e-cellulae. That is, every new cell arises from a pre-existing cell. No cell produced or generates spontaneously. एकदम से खाली जगह पर सेल नहीं बन जाएगी बेटा, ऐसा कभी नहीं होगा. नई सेल हमेशा एक पहले से पाए जाने वाली सेल से ही बनेगी. Now the question arises, how? By cell division. A parent cell divides and that will form a new cell. Only by the cell division, new cells are generated. No cell whatsoever possible can be generated spontaneously. Next one, the fourth one is, every living organism starts its life as a single cell. Unicellular में तो कोई problem ही नहीं है. Unicellular में तो single cell ही है. Now the question is related to how multicellular organisms like us starts from a single cell. And that's a quite a good question, good content-based question. That a multicellular organism arises from a single cell, produced from a single cell. Explain or justify this statement. What happens in a multicellular organism? Sexual reproduction takes place. Sperm came from father or male parent, and ovum or egg came from female. So that is the male gamete, and this one is female gamete, male sex cell and female sex cell. Both of them will fuse together in a process named as fertilization. ये दोनों आपस में fuse हो जाएंगे. They will fuse with each other. Sperm and ovum will both fuse with each other, and that fusion is known as fertilization, and form a first cell that is known as zygote. और ये जुड़कर क्या बनाएगा? फर्स्ट सेल बनाएगा, that is zygote. This zygote divides rapidly and repeatedly. What do you mean by this? This zygote divides quickly and in the repetition for multiple times and produce multiple cells. Produce large number of cells, millions, trillions of cells. Then those cells differentiated. What do you mean by differentiation? Every cell will form its specific function on the basis of shape, size and structure. Cell अलग अलग होने लगेंगी बेटा. Eyes की cells अलग, ear की अलग, ब्रेन की अलग, डाइजेस्टिव सिस्टम की अलग, लिवर जो है उसमें उसकी अलग, स्टमक की अलग, ब्लड की अलग, और सेल्स अपना अलग अलग फंक्शन परफॉर्म करने लगेंगी. दिस प्रोसेस इज नोन एज सेल डिफरेंशिएशन, एंड आफ्टर दैट अ कंप्लीट ऑर्गेनिज्म विल बी फॉर्म्ड. So that's how a multicellular complex organism is generated from a single cell, and that single cell is zygote. Whether it's human beings, dogs, cats, elephant, plants, all are generated from first cell that is named as zygote. So this is cell theory and its postulates. That is, all the living organisms are made up of cells and cell products. Second, every new cell arises from the pre-existing cells. Third, cell is the basic structural and functional unit of life. And fourth and the last is, every living organism starts its life as a single cell. All the living organisms follows the cell theory, but there is one kind of organism, or you can say one kind of structures present on the earth, named as viruses. They do not follow the cell theory. So viruses are the exceptions to the cell theory. Why they do not follow cell theory? The reasons are, the first one is they do not possess a complete cellular structure. Viruses के पास एक पूरा cellular structure, पूरा complete cellular structure नहीं होता. They are only composed of genetic material, nuclear material, that is either DNA or RNA, and have cytoplasm. They do not possess a cell membrane. Later half of this chapter will explain what a cell is composed of. Cell is composed of three components. The first one is cell membrane. Second one, cytoplasm. Third, nucleus. We will study these in detail one by one in later half of this chapter. Viruses possess these two, but they do not possess a cell membrane. Instead of cell membrane, they only have a protein coat over them, and that protein coat is known as capsid. That is why, if they do not possess a complete cellular structure, they are not cell. That means they do not follow cell theory. Second, viruses do not possess their own metabolism. They do not have their own metabolic activities. For their metabolic activities, they depend on the body of host cell. Host cell to which they affect, whose body they entered. That is known as a host cell. So for their metabolism, they completely dependent on the body of host cell. They do not possess their own metabolism. But living organisms must possess their own metabolism. So that is why they do not follow cell theory. They are exceptions to the cell theory. Next, the question arises here is, what is metabolism? कि metabolism फिर क्या है? Metabolism or metabolic activities is one and the same thing. The sum total of all the activities occurring inside the body of an organism is known as metabolism or metabolic activities. एक लिविंग ऑर्गेनिज्म की बॉडी में जितनी भी एक्टिविटीज हो रही हैं, those activities collectively known as, उन सभी एक्टिविटीज को मिलाकर क्या बोलते हैं? We call them metabolic activities or metabolism. Overall, there are two kinds of metabolic activities out there. So metabolism is subdivided into two forms: catabolic activities or catabolism, and anabolic activities or anabolism. They are two antagonistic to each other, exact opposite to each other. In catabolism or catabolic activities, complex molecules, complex or large structures are broken down into simple and smaller structures. So the breakdown of complex large structures into simple smaller structures, smaller molecules is known as catabolism or catabolic activities. On the parallel hand, in some other part of a cell, in some other part of body, anabolic activities are occurring at the same time. What are they? Exact opposite. In these smaller molecules join together to form new complex molecules, different complex molecules from them. So that is known as anabolic activities or anabolism. Both of these collectively known as metabolism. इन दोनों को मिलाकर क्या बोलते हैं? Metabolism. So this is what the metabolism. This term, repeats itself quite a few times in this chapter. Next one is the instrument by which we discovered the cell, that is microscope. The first compound microscope was discovered by Anton von Leeuwenhoek. Basically, microscope is the combination of magnifying lenses. But later on, as the size keeps on developing, we discover more efficient microscope, and the most efficient microscope till date we know is electron microscope. That has also further subtypes, but in your class it is a general introduction of it is electron microscope. It uses electron beam to magnify the object. Other compound microscope use light energy. They use electron, high speed electron, moving electrons, strike with the object and magnify the image. It can magnify the image up to millions of times, number of times. The first electron microscope was discovered by Knoll and Ruska. Okay, silent here. Knoll and Ruska in 1932, but it was first put to use in 1940. 8 years later on its discovery. So that is what the instrument by which we can magnify a cell, by which we can magnify a microscopic organism and can observe it very easily.